My unfaithful wife thought I didn't know she was sneaking to the bathroom at night to talk with another man. But one morning, she found a lawyer at her door. "Hey Reddit, my name is Tyler, and I'm 29 years old. For the past few years, I've been living what everyone around me considers the perfect life. I work as a marketing coordinator at a decent company, and I own a nice house in Miami with my wife Nicole. From the outside looking in, everything appears flawless. We're the couple that others probably envy on social media. But lately, something has felt fundamentally wrong, and I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. It started with the small things that you tell yourself don't matter. There was something about how Nicole closed the bathroom door that caught my attention. She didn't slam it dramatically or create any kind of scene. Instead, it was this smooth, precise click, like a banker carefully locking away valuables in a vault. That was the first moment I truly felt it. This quiet sense of disgust emanating from her, coupled with what seemed like practiced detachment. It was as if she was going through the motions of being my wife while mentally being somewhere else entirely. I found myself standing in the hallway one morning, holding a cup of coffee that I didn't even want, staring at that closed bathroom door. The moment felt surreal, like I was watching the final scene of a movie that I had never agreed to be part of. The silence in the house felt heavy and suffocating, and I realized that this feeling of disconnection had been building for weeks. Nicole had been moving differently around our home, and I started to notice the subtle changes in her behavior. She walked like she was constantly moving away from something invisible that was following her. Her voice had developed a sharp edge, the tone of someone who was perpetually waiting to be annoyed by whatever I might say or do. When she did laugh, which was becoming increasingly rare, it was too loud and forced, and it was never in response to anything I said. The warmth that used to exist between us had been replaced by this cold, professional politeness. Her schedule began changing in ways that seemed innocent enough at first. She started leaving for work earlier than usual and coming home later in the evenings. I noticed she had changed all of her passwords on her devices, claiming it was for security reasons. But perhaps what stung the most was when she started referring to me as dude in casual conversation. It wasn't the absence of affection that burned. It was the deliberate replacement of intimacy with casual contempt. She was treating me like a roommate she barely tolerated, rather than the husband she had promised to love and cherish. Initially, I didn't allow myself to suspect anything serious was happening. I'm not naturally a paranoid person, and I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. I told myself that maybe she was going through a stressful period at work, or perhaps this was some kind of phase that couples go through after being together for several years. But slowly, puzzle pieces started appearing in places where they shouldn't have been, and I could no longer ignore the obvious pattern that was emerging. I found a receipt in her coat pocket for an expensive dinner at a restaurant she claimed she had never been to. When I asked her about it casually, she brushed it off with a vague explanation that didn't make sense. There were lingerie tags at the bottom of our bathroom trash can, lingerie that I had never seen her wear. Most concerning was when I accidentally saw an Uber ride history on her phone, showing a trip to a hotel across town that I had never heard of, during a time when she told me she was working late at the office. Every time I brought up these inconsistencies, they were dismissed with lies that weren't even clever or well thought out. It was as if she didn't respect me enough to put effort into her deceptions. The most frustrating part was that I found myself playing along, pretending to believe her explanations even when they made no logical sense. I was actively participating in my own deception because I desperately wanted to believe that my suspicions were wrong. You have to understand something about my mindset during this period. I genuinely wanted to believe Nicole's explanations, no matter how flimsy they were. I was desperately clinging to the hope that this was all just stress, or hormones, or some mysterious phase that women in their late 20s go through that gets discussed on podcasts and lifestyle blogs. I wanted to convince myself that our marriage was just going through a rough patch that we could work through together. But deep down, I knew it wasn't any of those things. There was someone else. I didn't know who this other person was yet, but I could sense the shape of his presence in our relationship. He was lurking in the pauses during our conversations, hidden in her phone that she now guarded more carefully than ever before, and somehow embedded in the fresh perfume she had started wearing, a scent I didn't recognize and that she had never worn for me. This invisible third person had become a constant presence in our home, even though I had never seen his face. One particular night, I made a decision that would change everything. I stayed awake on the living room couch, pretending to be asleep, because I needed to know what time Nicole was really coming home. She had told me she would be back by 11 after another supposed evening helping her coworker Jordan through relationship problems. But I had started to doubt even these seemingly innocent explanations. She finally came through the front door at exactly 2:47 a.m. I kept my eyes closed and controlled my breathing to maintain the illusion that I was sleeping deeply. I could hear her keys fumbling in the lock like she was trying desperately not to wake me up, which struck me as odd if she had nothing to hide. She was wearing high heels that clicked against our hardwood floors, shoes that I recognized, but that she never wore when we went out together anymore. As she moved through the house, I caught glimpses of her through barely opened eyes. Her hair was tousled in a way that clearly wasn't from wind or a long day at work. There was something disheveled about her appearance that spoke of intimacy, of hands running through her hair in a way that mine hadn't in months. Most telling of all, she smelled distinctly like someone else's cologne, the kind of masculine scent that clings to skin rather than clothes, suggesting close physical contact. She stood in the living room for several seconds, staring at me lying on the couch. I could feel her eyes on me as I kept my breathing steady and my body still. In that moment, I expected her to do something. Maybe check if I was really sleeping, or perhaps lean down to kiss my forehead like she used to do when she came home late from legitimate work events. But she didn't stop, didn't check on me, didn't show any of the affection or concern that a loving wife would show. She simply walked past me as if I were a piece of furniture, her steps careful and deliberate, and disappeared upstairs to our bedroom. The next morning, I found her already in the kitchen when I came downstairs. Her hair was still damp from the shower, and she was mindlessly scrolling through her phone while sipping coffee. But when I looked more closely, I noticed something unusual. Her phone was completely dead, which was extremely out of character for Nicole. She was practically surgically attached to that device under normal circumstances. If her phone had a heartbeat, it would have been stronger and more consistent than either of ours. I decided to test the waters and asked her casually where she had been the previous night. Without looking up from her dead phone, she told me she had been with Jordan, her coworker, helping her work through some breakup drama. The explanation came out smoothly, as if she had rehearsed it, but something about her delivery felt off. I pressed a little further and asked if Jordan was okay after whatever relationship crisis she was supposedly dealing with. Nicole blinked several times, first said yes, then immediately changed her answer to no, and then abruptly shifted the conversation to whether we needed to buy oat milk at the grocery store. The rapid subject change was jarring and obvious, but I didn't let her off the hook that easily. "So, why is your phone dead?" I asked, keeping my tone casual and non-accusatory. She shrugged and claimed she had forgotten her charger at work, but I knew for a fact that she kept two chargers, one in her purse for emergencies and another in her car for longer trips. It was impossible that she would have forgotten both, especially given how dependent she was on staying connected. I decided to make breakfast and see what would happen. I prepared scrambled eggs for both of us, the way I had done countless mornings throughout our marriage. Nicole barely touched her portion, instead choosing to scroll through Instagram on her tablet with the focused attention of someone who was waiting for something specific to happen. Her behavior had the quality of someone killing time until a predetermined moment arrived. Then, at exactly 9:23 a.m., everything changed. Her supposedly dead phone suddenly lit up, very much alive and functional. It buzzed once and then seemed to freeze, the screen displaying a single notification that would shatter what remained of our marriage. There was no caller name, no dramatic text message, just a simple automated message that hit like a sledgehammer. The notification read, "Your e-signature request has been completed," followed by "divorce documents filed." For a full 8 seconds, neither of us said a single word. The world around us continued its normal routine. The toaster clicked as it finished warming bread, our neighbor's dog barked somewhere outside, the coffee maker gurgled as it finished brewing. But inside our kitchen, time had essentially stopped as we both stared at that glowing screen and processed what had just been revealed. Finally, I broke the silence. "What the hell is that?" I asked, my voice probably louder than I intended. Nicole didn't even blink. She didn't turn to look at me, didn't show any surprise or shock at being caught. Instead, she calmly wiped her mouth with a napkin and said, "Exactly what it looks like," in a tone so casual that she might have been commenting on the weather or discussing weekend plans. Then she stood up from the breakfast table and walked out of the kitchen without a backward glance, without an apology, without even a hint of tears or emotion. That's how the end of our marriage officially began, not with shouting matches or tearful confessions or dramatic confrontations, but with a phone screen lighting up and a woman who was too emotionally detached to to even flinch when her deception was finally exposed. I didn't follow Nicole out of the kitchen immediately. Instead, I remained frozen in my chair, still holding half a piece of toast that I had been eating when my world imploded. My coffee had gone cold in the mug, but I couldn't bring myself to move or speak or even process what had just happened. My mind felt like it was chewing on static silence, trying to make sense of the aftermath of her casual exit. My legs felt like they were glued to the floor, with that particular kind of stillness that you only experience after a car crash, when your body knows something terrible has happened, but your brain hasn't caught up yet. I found myself staring at Nicole's phone, which was still sitting on the kitchen table where she had left it. The screen was still illuminated, still displaying that damning notification like a loaded gun that had been carelessly abandoned on our breakfast table. Part of me wanted to scream, to throw the phone against the wall, to break something just to hear the sound of destruction that matched what I was feeling inside. But I couldn't move, couldn't react, couldn't do anything except sit there and try to understand how my marriage had just ended via an automated email notification. Eventually, I forced myself to stand up and walk over to her phone. I needed to know more, needed to understand the scope of what had been happening behind my back. I picked up the device with hands that were visibly shaking, and I discovered something that shocked me almost as much as the divorce notification itself. Nicole had left her phone completely unlocked. She had always been obsessive about keeping her phone secured with Face ID and passcode protection, but this time it was wide open, as if she wanted me to see what was inside. What I found was devastating in ways I hadn't prepared myself for. There was an entire string of emails from a divorce lawyer named Laura G. Peters, all marked confidential and discussing legal proceedings that I knew nothing about. The messages contained words and phrases like petition, waiver, and asset division, the cold, clinical language of a marriage being systematically dismantled. What hurt the most was discovering that I wasn't even listed as the primary contact in these communications. I was just an afterthought, a checkbox on someone's legal form, something to be informed about rather than involved in the process. But the emails were only the beginning. When I opened her text messages, I found the real gut punch that left me feeling completely hollow inside. There was an ongoing conversation with someone named Derek that made everything crystal clear. Derek had texted, "Can't believe you finally did it. You good, Nicole?" Nicole had responded, "Free, finally. Breakfast with the idiot now. Still pretending everything's fine. Lowell." Derek, "You want me to pick you up after?" Nicole, "Nah, he'll probably cry. I'll let him sulk for a bit, then go visit my mom." I read that exchange over and over again, my hands trembling as I held the phone. The idiot. That's what I had become to her. Not a husband, not a man she had once claimed to love, just some clueless background noise. I was an obligation she was shedding like old skin, something inconvenient that she needed to dispose of efficiently. Derek, this faceless stranger, apparently knew more about the status of my marriage than I did. He was the man she was texting while sitting at our kitchen table, sharing cruel jokes about my ignorance while I made her breakfast. I could hear Nicole moving around upstairs, cabinet doors opening and closing, hangers sliding across rods in our closet. The sounds were calm, casual, and surgical in their precision. She was packing her belongings with the same emotional detachment she had shown when walking out of the kitchen. There was no urgency, no drama, just the methodical efficiency of someone executing a plan she had been preparing for weeks or maybe months. I climbed the stairs and found her in our bedroom, folding her clothes into a duffel bag that I hadn't seen in years. It was the same bag we had used for our romantic weekend trip to the Smoky Mountains during happier times, and seeing it repurposed for her escape felt like another small betrayal. She didn't look up when I appeared in the doorway, just continued folding her clothes with the same mechanical precision. "You couldn't even say it to my face," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Nicole didn't pause in her packing. "What do you want me to say?" she replied without looking up. I stepped into the room, feeling anger building in my chest for the first time since this nightmare began. "How about why? How about when this started? Hell, how about who Derek is?" She sighed heavily, as if my questions were an inconvenience, and set a pair of jeans into the bag like she was already bored with this conversation. "Why?" "Because I'm done pretending to be happy in this marriage." "When?" "A while ago. Longer than you'd want to know." "Who?" "None of your damn business." I found myself laughing, but not because anything was funny. It was the kind of laugh that comes out when something is so absurdly cold and heartless that your brain doesn't know how else to process it. I didn't know what other reaction to have when faced with such casual cruelty. You filed for divorce and didn't tell me, I said, my voice getting louder. You were going to let me sit there eating eggs and talking about weekend plans while you had already handed papers to a lawyer. Finally, she looked up at me, and I swear I saw her smirk slightly. You don't get to be mad about this, she said, with a calmness that was more frightening than if she had been screaming. You stopped being my husband a long time ago. I just finally stopped pretending you weren't dead weight. Dead weight. Those two words hit me like a scalpel rather than a slap, quiet, clinical, and precise in their ability to cut through whatever was left of my self-respect. The phrase didn't land with the dramatic impact of a shout or an insult. Instead, it sliced through me with surgical accuracy, leaving me feeling like I was bleeding internally while she watched with complete indifference. I didn't yell back at her. I didn't cry or beg or try to fight for our marriage. I just stood there in our bedroom doorway, letting her systematically dismantle what remained of my sense of self with her words. I watched her zip up that duffel bag like it was just another Wednesday, like she wasn't walking away from 6 years of shared life, like there was no weight to what she was doing. There was no regret in her movements, no fear, no second thoughts, just the quiet satisfaction of someone who believed they had finally won something important. Derek's waiting, isn't he? I asked, already knowing the answer. She smiled at that question. Not a yes, not a no, just a smile that confirmed everything I needed to know about how long this had been planned and how thoroughly I had been deceived. Then Nicole walked past me, deliberately brushing my shoulder like I wasn't even there, like I was just another piece of furniture blocking her path. She left our bedroom door open behind her, which somehow felt worse than if she had slammed it. There was no anger in her exit, no emotion at all, just the cold efficiency of someone who had already mentally checked out of this situation weeks ago. She didn't slam the front door when she left either. Nicole closed it with the same controlled precision that she had been using to close everything else in our relationship. Bathroom doors, conversations, and now our marriage itself. It was as if she wasn't walking out on a life we had built together, but simply exiting a meeting that had run longer than expected. The sound of that door closing with such calculated calmness was somehow more devastating than any dramatic exit could have been. I stood at the top of the stairs, completely frozen in place, listening to the sound of her car pulling out of our driveway. The engine didn't roar, the tires didn't screech in a fit of passion or anger. The sound just gradually faded into the distance, like any other ordinary departure. But this wasn't ordinary, and the mundane nature of her exit made it feel even more surreal and final. I looked around our house as if I was seeing it for the first time. Everything was exactly where it had been that morning. Our wedding photos still hanging on the walls, the coffee table book she never actually read still open to the same page she had left it on months ago, her coffee mug sitting half full next to the kitchen sink. But somehow, everything had shifted fundamentally. The center of gravity in our home was gone, and even the oxygen felt different, heavier, like the atmosphere had changed when she walked out. I went back to the kitchen where her phone was still sitting on the table, face up and unlocked. She hadn't even bothered to take it with her, which struck me as either incredibly careless or deliberately cruel. The screen was still showing that conversation with Derek, and I knew I should have stopped reading, should have put the phone down and walked away. But I couldn't help myself. I needed to understand the full scope of what had been happening behind my back. There were more text messages, and they kept getting worse. Another message from Derek had come in just 3 minutes before Nicole left the house. He believe it, or is he going to try and win you back? Lowell, Nicole had responded. He looked like a kicked puppy. He'll probably write me a love letter or some cringe BS. She had followed this with a nauseated face emoji, as if the thought of me fighting for our marriage was physically disgusting to her. That particular exchange hit me differently than anything else I had read. It stung because I probably would have done exactly what she predicted. I would have fought for her, written her letters, begged for another chance if she had given me even the smallest opening. If she had shown me a crack in her facade, a moment where she seemed to remember who we used to be together, I might have humiliated myself trying to save something that was already dead. But she didn't give me that opportunity because she had already rewritten our entire relationship in her mind. I wasn't her husband anymore. I was just some pathetic man who was too emotionally soft to see the knife coming and too weak to pull it out once it was buried. I kept scrolling through their conversation, even though every new message felt like another wound. I found photos that made my stomach turn. Pictures of them together in what looked like a hotel room mirror. Nicole was wearing the same hoodie she had come home in that night when I pretended to be asleep on the couch. Derek was behind her, shirtless, holding her waist with both hands and grinning at the camera. But what struck me most was the look in Nicole's eyes. She didn't just look happy. She looked free, like she had been waiting for years to drop the act of being my wife and could finally be herself. Then I saw that there was a video file in their conversation. I stared at it for several seconds, my finger hovering over the play button. But I couldn't bring myself to watch it. I couldn't handle seeing whatever intimacy they had shared while I was sleeping in our bed, trusting that my wife was where she said she was. I dropped the phone and backed away from it like it was something alive and venomous that might attack me if I got too close. I pressed my fists against my temples and squeezed until the pressure was strong enough to drown out the static noise that was filling my skull. My head felt like it was going to explode from the combination of rage, humiliation, and disbelief that was coursing through me. I needed to do something, anything, to regain some sense of control in this situation. Then, I did something that I still don't fully understand or know how to explain. I picked up Nicole's phone again and opened a new text message to Derek. I typed out a simple message. "I know who you are. She's all yours." I hit send before I could second-guess myself or think about the consequences. There was no reply from Derek, which didn't surprise me. Of course he wouldn't respond. What could he possibly say? He knew exactly what he had done, just like Nicole knew exactly what she had done. They were both cowards who had been sneaking around behind my back for months, sharing cruel jokes about my ignorance while I made breakfast and planned our future together. I spent the next hour in our shower, standing fully dressed under water that was so hot it was almost scalding. The heat didn't help clear my mind or wash away the pain. Nothing could help with that. I felt like a man who had woken up in the middle of surgery to find his chest cracked open and his heart exposed, while nobody in the operating room seemed to care whether he survived the procedure or not. At 3:54 p.m., Nicole called me. I saw her name on my phone screen, and for a moment felt a flicker of hope that maybe she was calling to explain, to apologize, to try to fix what she had broken. But she wasn't calling to talk about our marriage or to offer any kind of explanation for her betrayal. She was calling to ask if I could put her mail in a box and leave it on the porch sometime next week. Like I was now just the landlord of a property she used to rent. I didn't answer the call. I couldn't trust myself to speak to her without saying something I would regret, and I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of hearing me break down. 5 minutes later, she sent me a text message. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I'm not the villain here." That text message was the final twist of the knife. Not because of the betrayal itself, not because of the months of lies and deception, not even because she had filed for divorce without telling me. The cruelest part was that she genuinely wanted to be seen as the victim in this situation. After everything she had put me through, after the calculated cruelty and the months of gaslighting, she still needed to believe that she was the one who had been wronged. I didn't respond to her text message claiming she wasn't the villain. I didn't even start typing a response because what could I possibly say to someone who had spent months systematically destroying our marriage while painting herself as the victim? I just stared at that message until my phone screen dimmed and went black, leaving me looking at the reflection of my own face staring back at me. In that darkened screen, I didn't see a man or a husband anymore. Just a ghost haunting a house that was now filled with someone else's silence and betrayal. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in what used to be our bed, but was now just my bed, I suppose, staring at the ceiling and mentally cataloging every single warning sign that I had chosen to ignore over the past few months. The evidence had been right in front of me the entire time, but I had been too trusting, too naive, or too afraid to acknowledge what was really happening. There were the new haircuts that Nicole claimed were for a fresh professional look at work. But that seemed designed to catch someone's attention rather than project workplace competence. She had started a new gym routine that didn't match her work schedule, claiming she needed to exercise for stress relief. But the timing never made sense when I really thought about it. Most telling of all, she had stopped locking the bathroom door when she showered, not because she wanted more intimacy between us, but because she no longer cared whether I walked in on her or not. She had become completely indifferent to my presence in our own home. Looking back now, I realized there had been no breadcrumbs left behind for me to follow. There was just the mess that remained after she had already feasted on our marriage with someone else. Every sign I had missed, every lie I had believed, every excuse I had accepted was evidence of how thoroughly she had outmaneuvered me while I continued to trust in the foundation of our relationship. I kept hearing her voice playing on an endless loop in my head. "I'm not the villain here." The audacity of that statement was breathtaking. As if 6 years of loyalty, love, and commitment on my part could be steamrolled and erased by a single sentence designed to rewrite the history of our entire relationship. She wanted to absolve herself of responsibility while simultaneously making me complicit in my own destruction. At 2:58 a.m., when the weight of insomnia and mental exhaustion became unbearable, I got up and did something I hadn't done in a long time. I walked to my home office and opened the bottom drawer of my desk, reaching for a small wooden box that I kept there. It was something Nicole had given me on our first anniversary, back when she still believed in us, and in the future we were building together. She had written, "For when we forget" on the lid in black Sharpie, and we had used it to store mementos from our early relationship. The box used to hold small notes we had written to each other, ticket stubs from movies and concerts we had attended together, and photos from our first vacations as a couple. When I opened it, everything inside smelled faintly of dust and vanilla, Nicole's signature scent from those early days when she still wore perfume for me instead of for other men. I poured the contents of the box onto my desk and started going through each item. There was a folded note from a road trip we had taken to Key West during our second year together. In Nicole's handwriting, it said, "You're my safe place no matter what happens." I remembered her writing that note during a rest stop when we were talking about our fears and insecurities, and how she had told me that being with me made her feel like she could handle anything life threw at us. There was a movie ticket stub from the night she had cried during the previews, not because the previews were sad, but because she was so happy and overwhelmed by the life we were building that she couldn't contain her emotions. That same night, she had told me through tears that she couldn't wait to have children with me and raise a family together in the house we had just bought. I found a photo of us standing in front of her childhood home during a visit to meet her parents for the first time. I was wearing that ugly burgundy sweater that she loved so much that she made me wear it on special occasions. In the photo, her arms were wrapped around my waist and she was looking at me instead of the camera, with an expression of pure adoration that I hadn't seen from her in over a year. My hands were shaking as I gathered all these memories and shoved them back into the wooden box. The contrast between the woman who had written those notes and taken those photos and the woman who had walked out of our kitchen that morning without a backward glance was so stark that it felt like I'd been married to two completely different people. Nicole was absolutely the villain in this story, and not just because she had cheated on me with her boss. She was the villain because she had spent months gaslighting me into believing that the distance between us was somehow my fault. She was the villain because she had smiled through every breakfast while texting another man under our kitchen table. She was the villain because she had looked me in the eye every single day and told me she loved me while planning her escape with someone else. And she was the villain because she had done all of this while making me feel like I was the one who was failing as a husband. Around 4:30 a.m., I received an automated email alert on my phone. The subject line read, "Your client has initiated divorce proceedings," and I knew it was from Nicole's lawyer with paperwork and deadlines that I was supposed to acknowledge and respond to. I didn't even open the email. I just stared at the subject line, trying to comprehend how I had ended up in a situation where I was receiving legal notifications about the end of my marriage from a lawyer I had never met, representing a wife who couldn't be bothered to have a conversation with me about our problems. There had been no couples therapy, no heart-to-heart conversations about what was wrong between us, no warnings that she was unhappy enough to consider leaving. There was just a courtroom date, a list of legal procedures, and a digital slap in the face from a woman I would have taken a bullet for without hesitation. That morning, the sun came up with the same indifferent routine it had followed every day of my life. Soft orange light spilled across our kitchen tiles as I stood there barefoot, sipping coffee from the mug Nicole had given me on my 28th birthday. The mug had "Best Husband Ever" printed on it in bold black letters, and as I held it in my hands, the irony was almost too much to bear. I walked over to the kitchen sink and deliberately dropped the mug. It hit the porcelain with a sharp crack, splitting down one side but not completely breaking apart. It was damaged just enough to show that it would never be whole again, but not destroyed enough to be thrown away completely. In that moment, the broken mug felt like a perfect metaphor for what was left of my sense of self after Nicole's betrayal. At 9:41 a.m., my doorbell rang with an unexpected chime that cut through the heavy silence that had settled over my house. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a brief moment I wondered if Nicole had somehow forgotten her keys and was coming back to collect something she had left behind. But when I opened the front door, I found Jordan standing on my porch, Nicole's real coworker, the same woman that Nicole had supposedly been helping through a breakup on all those late nights when she was actually with Derek. Jordan looked visibly nervous, and her eyes kept flicking past me into the house as if she expected Nicole to suddenly appear behind me. There was an anxious energy about her that told me she wasn't here for a casual social visit or to check on how I was handling the separation. She had the demeanor of someone who was carrying information that they knew would be painful to deliver. "Tyler," she said carefully, "can we talk?" I didn't answer immediately because deep down, I already knew what this conversation was going to be about. Jordan wasn't here to catch up or offer condolences about my marriage falling apart. She was here to confess something, to unburden herself of knowledge that she had been carrying around for too long. I stepped aside and let her into my house, closing the door behind us. Jordan stood just inside the doorway like the air inside my house was thicker and more oppressive than she had expected. She didn't sit down or make herself comfortable. She just stood there looking visibly anxious while we faced each other in the hallway, like two strangers waiting in line at a funeral. "Is she gone?" Jordan asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. "Left yesterday morning. Didn't even say goodbye." Jordan flinched at that information, like the absence of any goodbye ceremony made Nicole's betrayal somehow worse than it already was. She looked down at her hands for a moment, then forced herself to meet my eyes with the expression of someone who had rehearsed this conversation multiple times. "I didn't know how to tell you this," she said. "I tried so many times to find the right words, but there never seemed to be a good moment." My stomach dropped as I braced myself for whatever revelation was coming. "Tell me what?" Jordan took a shaky breath and walked into my living room, sitting on the very edge of the couch like she might need to make a quick escape. I didn't offer her anything to drink or try to make small talk. I just waited for her to find the courage to say whatever she had come here to tell me. "It wasn't just Derek," she began, then immediately corrected herself. "I mean, it was Derek, but he's not just some random guy she met." I felt my throat tighten with dread. "Who is he?" Jordan hesitated for several seconds, clearly struggling with how much to reveal. Then she said, "He's her boss. She met him at that strategy retreat in Las Vegas last November, the one where she was supposed to go with the rest of the team. The pieces started falling into place with sickening clarity." "So she didn't go with the team?" "No," Jordan replied. "She flew out early and met him the night before the retreat officially started. She told me later that they spent the entire evening together before anyone else arrived." I sat down across from her, feeling like I needed to brace myself for whatever additional details were coming. "So this wasn't just some recent fling that got out of hand." Jordan shook her head grimly. "It's been serious for months, Tyler. She would tell me things after we went out for drinks, when she got comfortable and her guard was down. She said she was planning to leave you for Derek by spring, but then he started pushing her to make things official faster than she had originally planned. That's why she filed for divorce without telling anyone. He was pressuring her to commit fully to their relationship. The revelation hit me like a physical blow." "So filing quickly was his idea?" Jordan nodded. "She told me that Derek said dragging it out would be more cruel to you than just ending it cleanly. Those were her words, that doing it quickly would be cleaner for everyone involved." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Cleaner. She keeps using that word like I'm some kind of mess that needs to be disposed of efficiently." Jordan continued talking, maybe because she had rehearsed all of this, or maybe because she was afraid that if she stopped, I would explode or throw her out before she could finish unburdening herself. I asked her more than once why she didn't just be honest with you from the beginning. "You're not a bad guy, Tyler. You didn't deserve to be treated like this." I stared at the floor, processing everything she was telling me. She didn't care what I deserved. There was a long pause in our conversation, and then Jordan added something in almost a whisper that made my blood run cold. "I think she enjoyed it." I looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "She told me that she liked watching you try to figure out what was happening," Jordan explained, her voice full of disgust. "She said she enjoyed watching you squirm and second-guess yourself. She told me that she had been performing the role of a good wife for so long that finally getting to play the villain made her feel powerful. That's exactly how she described it. She said it was like taking the power back." I didn't know what to say in response to that revelation. It wasn't shocking because it was so unexpected. It was devastating because it explained everything. The smirk when she was packing her bags. The calculated calmness when she walked out. The need to humiliate me rather than just leave. She hadn't just wanted to end our marriage. She had wanted to make me suffer in the process. Jordan kept talking, filling in details that painted an even clearer picture of Nicole's deception. She always had this version of herself in her head. The girl who never got walked over by anyone. The girl who made the first cut before anyone else could hurt her. I think over time she started seeing you as just another man who didn't really understand her or appreciate what she had to offer. I nodded slowly as the final pieces fell into place. Everything made sense now. Every insult disguised as sarcasm, every backhanded comment about how I never dreamed big enough or how I always played it too safe. In Nicole's mind, I had gradually transformed from the man she loved into dead weight around her ankle, and she had been planning her escape while I continued to believe we were building a life together. Jordan stood up to leave, clearly relieved to have finally shared what she knew. I'm sorry, Tyler. I should have told you sooner. I didn't want to get involved in your marriage, but when I saw her post that picture with Derek last night, I just couldn't keep pretending I didn't know what was happening. She posted a picture? I asked, feeling another stab of humiliation. Jordan nodded with obvious discomfort. Instagram soft launch. They're in Charleston together, looking very much like a couple on vacation. My jaw clenched so hard I thought my molars might crack. Nicole wasn't just moving on. She was flaunting her new relationship publicly while the ink on our divorce papers was still wet. Thanks for telling me, I said, walking Jordan to the door. I appreciate you coming forward. Jordan reached for the doorknob, then paused and turned back to me with a concerned expression. She's going to paint herself as the one who got away, Tyler. She'll tell people that you were controlling or boring, or that you held her back somehow. She's already started saying things like that to people at the office. Just be ready for that version of the story to spread. After Jordan left, I stood in my empty house for a long time, not moving or breathing deeply, just processing what she had confirmed for me. Jordan hadn't just verified the affair. She had confirmed the complete erasure of who I really was. Nicole wasn't just leaving me behind. She was actively rewriting our history to make me the villain in her new origin story. She expected me to disappear quietly into the background while she basked in sympathy and applause for escaping her terrible marriage. But I had absolutely no intention of giving her that satisfaction. By noon that same day, I had transformed into a man possessed, not by anger or rage or the need for dramatic revenge, but by something far more dangerous: ice-cold determination. I wasn't yelling or throwing things around the house like someone having an emotional breakdown. Instead, I had become surgical in my precision, methodical in my approach, and completely detached from any sentimentality about our shared past. I went through our house room by room, carefully packing every single item that belonged to Nicole. I wasn't throwing her belongings around in a fit of rage or destroying things out of spite. I was packing them with the same meticulous attention to detail that she had shown when planning her escape from our marriage. Every sweater, every pair of shoes, every makeup product she had hoarded under our bathroom sink went into clearly labeled boxes. I packed her favorite throw blanket, the one she used to wrap herself in during movie nights when we still enjoyed each other's company. I packed her monogrammed wine glass that she had received as a bridesmaid gift and treasured because it made her feel sophisticated. I even packed the novelty socks her mother had given her for Christmas that she never actually wore but kept in her drawer anyway because they were a gift. I made neat, organized piles and labeled each box with clinical precision. One box was marked bathroom items, another was labeled closet shoes, and I created a third box that I simply marked lies. That particular box held everything she had left behind that represented the promises she had broken and the life she had discarded so casually. Into the lies box went the framed wedding photo that she had never bothered to take down from our dresser, even though she was clearly planning her exit for months. I packed the engraved watch I had given her on our 3rd anniversary with the inscription, "Forever Yours," that she had worn every day until recently. I included the Valentine's Day card from last year where she had written, "You're my always" in her careful handwriting, apparently just months before she started her affair with Derek. I wanted her to open that box and choke on the weight of what she had so effortlessly discarded. I wanted her to be forced to confront the evidence of the woman she used to be before she decided to become someone else's echo instead of my wife. At 3:27 p.m., Nicole's lawyer called my phone. I saw the law firm's name on my caller ID and let it go straight to voicemail without hesitation. I already knew what the call was about: paperwork that needed to be signed, deadlines that needed to be met, digital signatures that would make our divorce official. But I wasn't going to play along with their timeline anymore. I wasn't going to make this process convenient or comfortable for either of them. Instead of responding to her lawyer's call, I went to our shared iCloud calendar that we had been using to coordinate our schedules throughout our marriage. Nicole had never bothered to change the password because she never thought she would need to. She had always been careless about digital security, assuming that I would never invade her privacy or use our shared accounts against her. I opened the calendar and added a single event for the following Thursday. 7 p.m. Come collect your trash. No additional context, no polite explanations, no reminder notifications. Just that blunt, direct message that would show up on her phone and let her know exactly how I viewed the situation. Then I logged into our shared Spotify account, the one we had both been using for road trip playlists and lazy Sunday morning music during the years when we still enjoyed spending time together. I created a new playlist and titled it Soundtrack to a Midlife Crisis, then filled it with breakup anthems, melancholy indie rock songs, and passive-aggressive tracks that Nicole used to complain about whenever they came on during our drives together. I set the playlist to autoplay and left it looping on her tablet in the guest room, where she used to work on her laptop during evenings when she claimed to be catching up on projects from the office. It was petty, maybe even childish, but it was the only kind of scream I had left in me. A quiet, persistent reminder that I wasn't going to disappear as quietly as she expected. At 6:15 p.m., my phone rang with a call from Nicole's mother, Linda. Her contact information was still saved in my phone as Linda M. Ice Queen, which was what Nicole had jokingly programmed it as once during the early days of our relationship when she was complaining about her mother's tendency to be emotionally distant. I had never changed the contact name, and now the cruel irony of that nickname felt almost prophetic. I answered the call, unsure of what to expect from this conversation. "Tyler," Linda said cautiously, like she was walking on eggshells and didn't want to be pulled into the drama between her daughter and me. "I heard what happened. I'm sure you already know that I know." "I assumed you did," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "I just wanted to say that I'm sorry this happened. I didn't know what she was planning. Not really. I knew she seemed distant when she talked about you lately, but I never imagined it would come to this." I didn't respond immediately because I could hear the genuine regret in Linda's voice. And I wasn't sure how to process the fact that Nicole's own mother seemed to disapprove of how this situation had been handled. Linda sighed heavily before continuing. "She's staying at my place for now, but she says she's moving in with someone next week. I assume that's the other man she's been seeing." I could hear the disgust in Linda's voice when she referred to Derek. She clearly didn't approve of him or of the way Nicole had handled our marriage, and knowing that even Nicole's own family could see through her victim narrative gave me a small measure of validation. "I packed all of her belongings," I told Linda. "Tell her she needs to come get them on Thursday evening, or I'll leave everything on the curb for the garbage collectors." There was a pause before Linda asked, "Are you okay, Tyler? I mean, really okay?" It was the first genuinely caring question anyone had asked me in days, and the concern in her voice caught me off guard. "No," I admitted, "but I will be eventually." After we hung up, I opened my laptop and drafted an email to Nicole's lawyer that was deliberately cold and businesslike. I wasn't going to let my emotions show or give them any ammunition to use against me in court proceedings. "All future communication regarding this matter will now go through my attorney," I wrote. "You will receive his contact information within 24 hours. Any further attempts to contact me directly will be ignored and documented. Additionally, your client's personal belongings will be available for pickup this Thursday between 7 o'clock and 9 p.m. After that time, they will be considered abandoned property and disposed of accordingly." I didn't sign the email with any pleasantries or professional courtesies. I let the silence and brevity speak for themselves, making it clear that I was no longer the accommodating husband who could be pushed around or manipulated. Then I did one final thing that felt both cruel and completely honest. I opened our old shared Google Photos album titled Us, which contained years of pictures from our relationship, vacations, anniversaries, everyday moments that had once seemed precious and permanent. I added one last photo to the album, a picture of the box labeled Lies, sitting on our kitchen table where we used to eat breakfast together every morning. I wrote a caption for the photo, "The only part of you that still belongs here." Then I archived the entire album and deleted Nicole's access to it, effectively closing the last window she had into my life and my thoughts. With that final digital gesture, I had severed the last connection between us that wasn't being handled by lawyers and legal documents. Thursday arrived faster than I had expected, and by then, my house had been transformed into something completely different from the home Nicole and I had shared. The space was spotless in a way that went beyond normal cleaning. I had scrubbed away every trace of her presence with the kind of methodical rage that leaves your hands raw and your mind eerily blank. I had cleaned with surgical precision, removing not just the obvious signs of her occupancy, but every subtle reminder that she had ever lived there. I had emptied the house of her scent, which had lingered in fabrics and corners longer than I expected. I removed every piece of her clutter that had accumulated over the years. The magazines she never finished reading, the hair ties that somehow appeared on every surface, the collection of lip balms that migrated from room to room. I scrubbed away her lipstick prints from the hallway mirror where she used to check her appearance before leaving for work, back when I thought she was actually going to work instead of meeting Derek. I had even cleaned the coffee stains from our kitchen counter, the ones that had appeared where Nicole used to set her mug every morning while she pretended to listen to me talk about my plans for the day. Now I realized she had probably been thinking about Derek during those conversations, planning their next meeting while nodding and smiling at whatever I was saying. By 6:50 p.m., all of Nicole's belongings were stacked neatly on the front porch in clearly labeled boxes. They were taped securely and arranged with military precision, but lined up like a quiet funeral procession for the death of our marriage. Each box represented a different aspect of the life she was abandoning, and seeing them all together made the scope of her departure feel more real and final. I positioned myself on the porch bench with a beer and waited. I wasn't hiding inside the house or avoiding the confrontation. I wanted to be visible when they arrived. I wanted Nicole to see that I wasn't the broken, pathetic man she expected to find. I had survived her betrayal and emerged as someone harder, colder, and completely done with her games. At 7:13 p.m., headlights appeared in my driveway, but it wasn't Nicole's car. Of course it wasn't. She was too much of a coward to face me herself after everything she had put me through. Instead, Derek stepped out of an expensive sedan like he belonged in my driveway, like he was doing me some kind of favor by showing up to collect the debris from the marriage he had helped destroy. He was exactly what I had expected. A middle-aged man in a crisp, button-down shirt, wearing the kind of fake, practiced smile that successful corporate climbers perfect over years of manipulating people. He held his car keys in his hand like a prop, twirling them casually as if this whole situation was just a minor inconvenience in his otherwise perfect day. Derek walked up to my porch with the confident stride of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. He gave me a soft nod, the kind of acknowledgement you might give to a neighbor you barely know, as if that small gesture would be enough to keep his jaw in one piece and avoid any unpleasant confrontation. I didn't get up from the bench where I was sitting. I just continued sipping my beer and stared at him with the kind of steady, unblinking gaze that makes people uncomfortable. I wanted him to understand that I wasn't going to make this easy or pleasant for him. "Hey, man," Derek said, in a tone that was aggressively casual. He called me man, like we were acquaintances who had run into each other at a gas station, rather than acknowledging that he had spent months systematically destroying my marriage from the inside out. "She's not coming herself?" I asked, keeping my voice level and controlled. Derek rubbed the back of his neck in a gesture that was probably meant to look apologetic, but came across as nervous. "Thought it'd be cleaner this way," he said. There was that word again. Cleaner. It was the same term Nicole had used to justify filing for divorce without telling me, and apparently it was also Derek's preferred way of describing his cowardly refusal to let Nicole face the consequences of her own actions. They both seemed to view me as a mess that needed to be disposed of as efficiently as possible, without any unnecessary emotional complications or acknowledgement of the pain they had caused. I stood up from the bench slowly and deliberately. I wasn't moving quickly or making threatening gestures, but I wanted Derek to understand that I was done being treated like some inconvenient obstacle that could be brushed aside with casual politeness. "You know," I said, my voice carrying the weight of months of suppressed anger, "you could have just waited until she ended our marriage properly. You didn't have to sneak around behind my back for months, hiding in text messages and hotel rooms. You didn't have to smile in my face at company events like a coward while you were destroying my life." Derek sighed in the way that people do when they're being forced to acknowledge uncomfortable truths they'd rather ignore. "Look, what happened. She wasn't happy in the marriage, and you were—" He didn't finish that sentence, probably because he realized that anything he said next would only make the situation worse for him. Instead, he just bent down and started loading Nicole's boxes into the trunk of his car, working with the mechanical efficiency of someone who wanted to complete this task and leave as quickly as possible. I leaned against the porch railing and watched him struggle with one of the heavier boxes, the one that contained all of Nicole's books and personal mementos. Her lies apparently had more physical weight than either of us had anticipated, and seeing Derek strain to lift them gave me a small, petty satisfaction. "She ever tell you about our first apartment?" I asked conversationally, as if we were just two guys having a casual chat. Derek paused in his loading but didn't respond, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this conversation was taking. "She picked that place specifically because the bedroom window faced east," I continued. She said waking up to the sunrise every morning made her feel hopeful about the future we were building together. Funny how the same woman who used to talk about hope and forever couldn't be bothered to say goodbye when she walked out of our marriage. Derek's jaw tightened, but he continued loading boxes without acknowledging what I had said. He was clearly hoping that if he ignored me long enough, this uncomfortable encounter would end, and he could drive away without having to confront the reality of what he had participated in. "You'll get maybe 6 months with her," I said, my voice carrying the confidence of someone who had spent years learning Nicole's patterns. "Then she'll start finding ways to blame you for whatever's missing in her life. She always needs someone to be the villain in her story, and eventually that person is going to be you." Derek's movements became more aggressive as he loaded the final boxes, clearly agitated by my prediction, but unwilling to engage in a direct confrontation. When he finished and shut the trunk, he stood by his car door for a moment, looking like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. "You done?" he finally asked, his fake politeness wearing thin. I shrugged casually. "I'm just getting started." Derek got into his car without another word, but before he could drive away, I walked up to his window and tapped on the glass. He rolled it down halfway, his caution now obvious as he realized this encounter wasn't ending as smoothly as he had hoped. "Tell Nicole I said something for me," I said, leaning down so he could hear me clearly. "Tell her I didn't cry when she left. I didn't beg her to stay or try to win her back. I watched her walk out of our house and I didn't even blink. She doesn't get to rewrite that part of the story." Then I walked away, back toward my front door, without waiting for his response or watching him drive off. I wanted him to understand that I was already done with this conversation and moving on with my life, while he was the one left sitting in a car full of another man's wife's belongings. The night after Nicole left for good, my house made a completely different sound. It wasn't louder or quieter than before. It was emptier, but in a way that felt like the space was finally breathing again after holding its breath for far too long. The boxes were gone from the porch, leaving behind only clean concrete and the lingering sense that a weight had been lifted. Her perfume no longer hung in the air like a ghost, and for the first time in months, the silence felt welcoming rather than oppressive. Yet everything still carried the scent of aftermath, that particular smell that lingers after something significant has ended. I didn't cry that night, and I didn't punch walls or destroy things in a fit of rage. Instead, I just stood in my front doorway for a while, staring out at the street and trying to understand how a life that had taken 6 years to build could vanish completely in the space of a half-hour pickup window. Inside the house, Nicole's absence wasn't the peaceful quiet I had expected. It was surgical in its precision, the kind of silence that doesn't settle gently, but slices through the air with sharp edges. I made dinner for one person, ate it alone at our kitchen table, washed the single plate, and then sat on the couch where I used to watch movies with my wife. That's when the text messages started flooding my phone. The messages weren't from Nicole. They were from other people, mutual friends and acquaintances, who had no idea what had really happened but were already receiving Nicole's carefully crafted version of our story. She had apparently started laying the groundwork for her narrative immediately, and the whispers were already crawling through our social circle like poison. Kelly from Nicole's book club texted, "Hey, I heard you and Nicole split up. That's so sad. She told us things had gotten kind of cold between you two for a while now. Hope you're doing okay." Cold between us? The audacity of that rewriting was breathtaking. Nicole was the one who had become cold, distant, and calculating while I continued to make breakfast and plan our future together like a fool. Ryan from our work happy hours sent, "Damn, man. Sorry to hear about you and Nicole. She mentioned that you'd been struggling with some personal stuff for a while, but I didn't know it was that serious." Struggling? The only thing I had been struggling with was trying to understand why my wife had become a stranger who treated me with contempt. But according to Nicole's revisionist history, I was apparently the one with problems that had driven her away. Each message that came in felt like another small betrayal. Nicole wasn't just erasing our marriage. She was rebuilding herself as the long-suffering wife who had finally escaped a husband who couldn't meet her needs. She was positioning herself as the survivor of a relationship where I was the problem, the dead weight, the reason things fell apart. I let the messages pile up without responding to any of them. I wasn't going to waste my energy defending myself against a story that had already been edited, printed, and distributed to our entire social circle. If these people needed a villain to make sense of the situation, they could have me in that role. I was done trying to control narratives or manage other people's opinions, but I wasn't completely finished with Nicole yet. At 11:18 p.m., I logged into the shared Google Drive account we had used for house projects, insurance documents, and other practical aspects of our life together. Buried deep in one of the subfolders was a document that Nicole had created about 2 years earlier, during a period when she was feeling particularly optimistic about our future. The folder was labeled Life Plans, and it contained a detailed 5-year strategy that Nicole had written when she was still invested in building something permanent with me. I opened the document and read through her carefully organized vision for our future together. She had outlined plans for children, a vacation home, her dream job progression, and financial goals that would require both of our incomes and commitment. My name appeared throughout the document, woven into every major decision and milestone. The word together appeared dozens of times, along with phrases like our family, our home, and our future. It was a comprehensive blueprint for a life that she had apparently stopped wanting months ago, but had never bothered to tell me about. I downloaded the document and saved it as a PDF, then composed an email to Nicole's personal account. The subject line read, "Thought you might want this." In the body of the email, I wrote, "Here's a copy of the life you planned with me 2 years ago, in case you ever forget who you were before you became someone else's echo." I didn't include a signature or any additional commentary. I just attached the PDF and hit send, knowing that she would recognize the document and understand exactly what I was showing her. It was evidence of the woman she used to be, before she decided that our marriage was something to escape from rather than fight for. Within minutes, I saw that she had read the email. The read receipt appeared on my screen, but there was no reply. Instead of responding to my message, Nicole posted a photo to her Instagram story about 30 minutes later. It showed 2 wine glasses clinking together in a toast, with her and Derek's hands visible holding the stems. The caption read, "Freedom looks good on me." That Instagram post was the moment I stopped being angry with Nicole. Not because I had forgiven her, and certainly not because I had healed from what she had done to me, but because I finally understood something crucial about our entire relationship. I wasn't the one who had lost something irreplaceable when our marriage ended. She was. Nicole had given up a man who would have carried her through any crisis, supported her through any challenge, and loved her unconditionally through whatever changes life brought our way. Instead, she had chosen someone who applauded while she burned the bridge that led back to stability, loyalty, and genuine partnership. She wasn't celebrating freedom. She was fleeing from the weight of her own choices. She wasn't actually free in any meaningful sense. She was running away from the person she used to be, and Derek was just the convenient escape route that allowed her to avoid confronting what she had become. The difference between freedom and flight was significant, and that distinction was mine to keep as I moved forward with my life. 3 days later, I received something unexpected in my mailbox. Not another legal document from her attorney, but a handwritten letter from Nicole herself. The envelope was made of expensive stationery, the kind she used for birthday cards and formal thank you notes, and it was sealed with a wax stamp that she had probably purchased specifically for this occasion. Even in her attempts at apology, Nicole couldn't resist making everything into a performance. When she couldn't control the truth through her usual methods, she dressed it up in expensive packaging and tried to make it appear more meaningful than it actually was. I sat at our kitchen table, the same one where she used to sit cross-legged while eating cereal and planning our days together, and opened the letter without expecting much in the way of genuine remorse or accountability. The letter was exactly 6 lines long, written in Nicole's careful slanted cursive. "Tyler, I know you hate me right now. That's fair. I want to apologize for leaving, but only for how I did it. You were good to me. Too good. Maybe that made it harder to leave the right way. And yes, I lied about everything. I just didn't know how to leave without burning everything down behind me. Don't wait for me. I won't look back." And no love, no genuine remorse, no acknowledgement of the months of gaslighting and cruelty she had put me through. Just neat clinical sentences wrapped in expensive paper, as if the quality of the stationery could somehow elevate the emptiness of her words. It was an apology that wasn't really an apology, just a final attempt to control how I remembered her departure. I read the letter once, then again, letting the hollow inadequacy of her words sink in. Then I walked to the kitchen sink, dropped the letter into the garbage disposal, and turned it on. The expensive paper and careful handwriting disappeared in seconds, reduced to nothing but noise and debris that washed away down the drain. Nicole had said she wouldn't look back, and that was perfectly fine with me. I wasn't going to be standing there waiting for her to change her mind anyway. I took the rest of that day off from work and just drove. I had no map, no destination in mind. just the need to put miles between myself and the suffocating weight of everything that had happened in my house over the past week. I drove without music or podcasts, letting the rhythm of the road and the monotony of passing scenery clear my head in a way that staying home couldn't accomplish. I ended up at the lake about an hour outside of town, the same one that Nicole and I used to visit during early fall when the leaves were changing and the air was crisp enough to make us feel like we were in a postcard. It was the place where we had once carved our initials into a tree like teenagers drunk on the delusion that what we felt for each other was permanent and unbreakable. Finding that tree took longer than I expected, but eventually, I located it near the water's edge where we used to spread out a blanket and talk about our future together. The carving was still there, weathered but visible. T+N, with a little uneven heart around it that I had carved with my pocket knife, while Nicole laughed and called me corny for being so sentimental. She had taken a picture of that carving with her phone immediately after I finished it, posting it to her social media that same night with the caption, "Still can't believe I found my person." At the time, I thought that post represented one of the happiest moments of our relationship, a public declaration that we belonged to each other in a way that felt both private and eternal. Of course, that post had been deleted along with most of our other photos together. Nicole had systematically scrubbed her social media presence of any evidence that our relationship had ever mattered to her, sanitizing her digital history as efficiently as she had packed her belongings and walked out of our house. Standing there looking at those carved initials, I realized something that was both brutal and freeing at the same time. Nicole hadn't just broken her wedding vows or betrayed the trust I had placed in her. She had never really meant any of the promises she made. When the first real storm hit our relationship, when actual life crept in with all its messy imperfections and daily challenges, she had immediately started looking for someone else, someone easier, someone who didn't remind her of the commitments she had made when she thought love was supposed to be effortless. I picked up a rock from the ground and used it to scratch a single line through our carved initials. I wasn't trying to erase them completely, or pretend that what we had shared never existed. I just wanted to mark them for what they really were. A lie that I had believed for far too long. I didn't cry standing there by that tree, even though I had expected the emotions to hit me hard in such a symbolic place. I thought I would break down when confronted with the physical evidence of what we used to mean to each other, but instead, the grief felt like it was drying up inside me, transforming into something harder and calmer, like stone that had finally cooled after being forged in fire. On the drive back home, I turned off my phone completely. I didn't want any distractions, any messages from well-meaning friends, or any digital noise that might interfere with the clarity I was finally starting to feel. I didn't want Nicole haunting my silence anymore with notifications or memories or the temptation to check what she was doing with her new life. Back at the house, I opened the closet where Nicole's dresses used to hang and found one item that had somehow been overlooked during my methodical packing session. It was her red dress. The one she had worn on our 3rd anniversary when she still looked at me like I was the most important person in the room. Like I was the whole universe condensed into one person who belonged entirely to her. I held the dress for a moment, not out of sentiment or nostalgia, but just to observe how little weight it carried without Nicole inside it. The fabric was beautiful, expensive, carefully maintained, but it was ultimately just an empty shell without the person who used to give it meaning. It reminded me of how hollow our entire relationship had become in those final months. Beautiful on the surface, but containing nothing of substance underneath. I folded the dress carefully and placed it in the box I had labeled Lies, the same box that contained all the other artifacts of promises Nicole had made and subsequently abandoned. This would be the final item I returned to her, not out of kindness or any desire to maintain a connection, but as a definitive statement of closure that I was giving to myself. The day I returned that final box, it was raining. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind of rain that would have matched the emotional weight of the moment, but just a quiet, steady drizzle that turned everything gray and reflective. I didn't wear a jacket or bring an umbrella because it felt appropriate to let the water soak through my shirt and run down my arms. The cold seemed fitting as I carried that last box to Nicole's mother's front porch. I didn't ring the doorbell or wait around to see if anyone was home. I didn't want a confrontation or a conversation that might complicate the clean finality of what I was doing. I just set the box down on the covered porch, positioned the red dress so it was folded neatly on top where it would be immediately visible, and tucked a single note into the collar. The note said simply, "You forgot this, like you forgot everything else." I walked back to my car and drove away before anyone could open the door. Before anyone could see the expression on my face or try to engage me in dialogue about what had happened between Nicole and me. I didn't want witnesses to this final gesture, and I didn't want to give anyone the opportunity to misinterpret my motivations or try to convince me that I was being too harsh. By the time I arrived back home, the house felt different again. Not quieter or emptier, but more like the echo of Nicole's presence had finally faded completely. For the first time since she had walked out, her absence wasn't something I noticed or felt actively missing. Instead, it was something I welcomed. A space that had been cleared for me to figure out who I was without her constant judgment and manipulation. That night, I went through my phone systematically and started unfollowing people on social media. I removed her friends, her cousins, her coworkers, and anyone else who knew both of us, but had remained silent while she systematically destroyed our marriage. If they hadn't reached out to check on me by now, they weren't really neutral parties in this situation. They were spectators who had chosen to watch from the sidelines while my life imploded. I had no use for people who treated my pain like entertainment, or who were more interested in Nicole's drama than in basic human decency. I wasn't interested in rebuilding a version of my old social life that included people who had shown me their true character through their silence and inaction. I wasn't trying to reconstruct the life I had shared with Nicole. I was intentionally building something completely new. At 10:19 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text message from Nicole. It was the first direct communication I had received from her since that pathetic handwritten letter. And seeing her name on my screen felt like a violation of the peace I had been carefully constructing. The message contained just 4 words. Was that really necessary? I stared at those words for several seconds, marveling at the fact that even now, even after everything she had put me through, Nicole still had the audacity to question my actions and try to make me feel guilty for refusing to disappear quietly. She wanted to know if returning her belongings and cutting off all contact was really necessary, as if I owed her continued access to my life and emotions after she had discarded both so carelessly. Instead of responding to her question, I blocked her number. She didn't get to have access to me anymore. Not to my time, not to my energy, not to my pain, and certainly not to my healing process. That chapter of my life was officially closed, and I was the one holding the key. After blocking Nicole's number, I opened a blank document on my laptop with no plan or predetermined title in mind. I just started typing, letting the words flow out of me without censoring or editing as I went. I found myself writing about everything that had happened, not just the affair and the divorce, but about my own role in what had gone wrong between us. I wrote about how I had let things slide for months, ignoring obvious red flags, because I wanted to believe that our marriage was stronger than the evidence in front of me. I wrote about how I had tried to love someone through their own gradual erosion, thinking that if I just remained patient and supportive enough, Nicole would remember who she used to be and find her way back to us. I wrote about how I had mistaken silence for peace, compliance for harmony, and how I had gradually shrunk myself down to avoid confronting the reality that my wife was becoming a stranger who viewed me with contempt. I had spent months walking on eggshells, trying to be the perfect husband to a woman who was already planning her escape with another man. The words came faster than I had expected, pouring out of me without the usual hesitation or self-doubt that typically accompanied my attempts at honest self-reflection. For the first time in weeks, my hands weren't shaking as I typed, and I felt a sense of clarity that had been missing since the morning Nicole's phone had lit up with that divorce notification. Somewhere between paragraphs, I realized that I wasn't writing to remember Nicole or to process my anger toward her. I was writing to remember myself, the man I had been before I became her supporting character, before I started defining my worth by her approval or disapproval. I was trying to reconnect with the person who used to believe in second chances and loyalty, who showed up when it mattered and fought for the people he loved. That man hadn't disappeared when Nicole left. He had just been buried under months of gaslighting and manipulation. He was still there, waiting to be allowed back into his own life, ready to apply those same principles of loyalty and commitment to someone who would actually value them. At midnight, I saved the document and stepped outside into the rain again. I stood in my backyard with my face tilted up toward the sky, letting the water wash down my face and soak through my clothes. I wasn't trying to be dramatic or symbolic. I just needed to feel something cleansing and real after hours of confronting the most painful truths about my marriage and myself. I stood there barefoot in the darkness, letting the rain work like a baptism for a man who was finally, truly finished being someone else's casualty. The water was cold enough to make me shiver, but it also felt like it was washing away the last residue of who I had been during those final months with Nicole. The anxious, diminished version of myself who had tried so desperately to save something that was already dead. The following week passed with a strange sense of weightlessness that I hadn't expected. There were no more calendar notifications reminding me about couples therapy sessions that Nicole had agreed to attend, but never actually scheduled. There were no more tense dinners where we sat across from each other, pretending that everything was fine while the silence stretched between us like a chasm. Most importantly, there was no more pretending. No more exhausting performance of being a happy couple when friends came over. No more forcing conversations about weekend plans with someone who was already mentally planning her life with another man. The constant, low-level anxiety that had become my baseline emotional state finally began to lift. People often say that heartbreak is loud and dramatic, but for me, it was exactly the opposite. My grief was quiet and still, like standing alone in the middle of a snow-covered field at night where every sound is muffled and every movement feels deliberate and significant. There was a purity to the silence that I had never experienced before. Not emptiness, but clarity. Nicole didn't try to contact me again after I blocked her number. She didn't show up at my house or send messages through mutual friends or create fake social media accounts to check on what I was doing. She disappeared completely into whatever carefully curated world she had constructed with Derek, and I found that her absence was far more peaceful than her presence had been during those final months of our marriage. The woman I had married was gone long before she physically walked out the front door, and I was finally done trying to resurrect someone who had chosen to become a ghost. I was done feeding memories of a person who no longer existed and had probably stopped existing much earlier than I wanted to admit to myself. But the world around me took longer to adjust to this new reality. At work, my colleagues had stopped asking direct questions about my personal life, but I could feel their discomfort in the way they interacted with me. Some seemed unsure about which version of Nicole's story to believe, while others gave me the kind of tight smiles and careful treatment that people reserve for someone who has been through a trauma they don't fully understand. The people who did know the real story started treating me differently as well, but in a way that was almost harder to handle. They spoke to me like I had been through something sacred and transformative, like I wasn't made of the same materials as other people anymore. There was a reverence in their voices that made me uncomfortable, because it suggested that I had been permanently changed by what Nicole had done to me. Maybe I had been changed, but not in the way they assumed. I wasn't broken or damaged. I was just older, sharper, and stripped clean of illusions I should have abandoned years earlier. I started spending my evenings doing absolutely nothing productive, and I found that this intentional emptiness was exactly what I needed. I would sit outside on my back porch with a drink and no phone, watching the wind move through the trees and listening to the strange, peaceful hush that settles over a neighborhood just before dusk arrives. Some nights I found myself talking out loud, not to Nicole or to myself exactly, but to the silence that surrounded me. I would ask questions that I didn't expect to receive answers to. Why had I allowed Nicole to drift so far away before I noticed what was happening? Why had I made myself smaller and quieter to accommodate someone who was using my accommodation as permission to treat me with increasing contempt? Why had I believed that someone could love me properly while simultaneously being capable of such calculated cruelty? But these questions became less important with each passing day. I was no longer trying to solve the puzzle of Nicole's choices or make sense of her capacity for deception. Instead, I was focused on rebuilding my own decision-making process and figuring out what I actually wanted from life now that I was free to choose without considering someone else's constantly shifting expectations. I started organizing old photographs, not to burn them or throw them away dramatically, but simply to archive them properly. One by one, I placed pictures from our relationship into a plastic bin that I labeled past. I wasn't trying to erase the evidence that Nicole and I had once been happy together. I was just putting that chapter of my life into its proper historical context. These weren't images of failure or regret anymore. They were simply documentation of a period in my life that had ended, like old school photos or pictures from a job I no longer had. The emotional charge had drained out of them, leaving behind only the facts of what had happened and when. And then something small but significant occurred that reminded me that life was still capable of surprising me in positive ways. I went to a hardware store on a Saturday morning to pick up supplies for some minor home repairs, the kind of errands I used to run while Nicole slept in on weekends, back when I thought her sleeping late was just a preference rather than evidence that she was staying up late texting another man. While I was standing in the paint aisle trying to choose between different shades of white for my bathroom, I found myself talking to a stranger who was facing the same overwhelming array of color options. She was a woman in her early 30s, probably around my age, and she was looking for the perfect shade of blue for her front door. We ended up laughing together about the absurd number of paint color names that were essentially indistinguishable from each other. She asked what I was painting, and I told her about a room that I was finally getting to call entirely my own. She smiled when I said that, and I could tell from her expression that she understood exactly what I meant by that phrase. Her name was Harper, and I learned that she had recently moved into her own place after ending a long-term relationship that hadn't been working for either person involved. We talked for maybe 15 minutes about paint and home improvement projects and the strange freedom that comes with being able to make decisions without having to consider someone else's preferences or opinions. I don't know what will develop from that brief conversation, if anything at all. I'm not projecting romantic possibilities or building elaborate fantasies about where things might lead. But for the first time since the morning Nicole's phone had lit up with divorce papers, I felt something inside me that wasn't rage or grief or emptiness. It was small and tentative, but it was undeniably alive and hopeful. It was the feeling of a person who was ready to be genuinely present in his own life again. It's strange how survival actually feels when you're living through it rather than looking back on it from a safe distance. The process isn't heroic or cinematic like the movies suggest it should be. There's no dramatic moment where you look in the mirror and declare, "I made it," with swelling orchestral music in the background. Instead, survival is quieter and grimmer than anyone prepares you for. It sneaks up on you during the most mundane moments, while you're folding laundry on a Tuesday evening, or when you hear a song on the radio that you thought Nicole had ruined forever, only to discover that you can listen to it now without feeling like someone is twisting a knife in your chest. You realize that you're still here, still yourself, just older and sharper and stripped of illusions that were probably holding you back anyway. That realization became my most important lesson from this entire nightmare. The truth wasn't that Nicole was uniquely cruel or that she had cheated on me with her boss. The real revelation was that somewhere along the way, I had convinced myself that I needed her approval and presence to be a complete person. I had gradually handed over pieces of my identity to someone who was systematically discarding them while planning her escape. But I didn't need Nicole to be whole. I never had. She had left, rewritten our history to suit her new narrative, and transformed our home into a memory and me into a footnote in her origin story. But in doing all of that, she had accidentally exposed something about herself that she never intended to reveal: her own fundamental emptiness. Nicole's need to be constantly adored and validated, even if it meant destroying the person who loved her most, revealed a kind of hollowness that would follow her into every future relationship. People like Nicole don't actually win in the long run. They just move faster from chapter to chapter, never realizing that they're trapped in the same story with different characters every time. The plot never changes because the problem was never external. Nicole would carry her capacity for cruelty and self-deception into whatever life she built with Derek, and eventually he would become the obstacle she needed to overcome rather than the solution to her unhappiness. Meanwhile, I had stopped reading her book entirely. I was finally writing my own story, and it felt like the first honest thing I had done in months. I decided to paint the guest room that had once served as Nicole's home office, the space where she used to claim she was working late while actually texting Derek and planning their hotel meetings. I chose a completely new color scheme and bought new furniture: a comfortable reading chair, shelves for books I actually wanted to read, and a small desk positioned near the window where natural light would make writing feel less like work. This became my thinking room, a space that didn't apologize for being quiet and didn't serve any purpose other than allowing me to be present with my own thoughts. It was the kind of room that invited reflection and solitude rather than productivity or performance. For the first time in years, I had created a space that existed entirely for my own comfort and peace of mind. Harper and I had talked a few more times since that first conversation in the paint aisle. We had met for coffee once and taken a long walk through downtown Miami on a Saturday afternoon when the weather was perfect and neither of us had anywhere else we needed to be. Our conversations were easy and natural, without the underlying tension that had characterized my interactions with Nicole during those final months of our marriage. But more importantly, there were no expectations hanging over our friendship. We were just two people who had each survived the end of relationships that should have ended much sooner than they did. And we understood the value of being genuinely present with another person without trying to fix them or change them or convince them to be someone different. When I lay in bed now, I didn't spend hours wondering what Nicole was doing with Derek, or whether she ever thought about the life she had abandoned. I didn't rehearse imaginary confrontations that would never happen or check her social media for signs of regret that would never appear. I had finally let her go completely, not because I had forgiven her, but because holding on to anger was giving her more power over my life than she deserved. The most liberating realization was understanding that when someone shows you exactly who they are through their actions, and you choose to keep holding on to hope that they'll change, you're not actually loving them. You're abandoning yourself. You're choosing to believe in a fiction rather than accepting the reality that's right in front of you. I had been the kindest, most loyal man in the room during my marriage to Nicole, and I was still the one who ended up bleeding when everything fell apart. But that wasn't my fault, and it wasn't a reflection of my worth as a person. It was simply her reflection staring back at her, and she had chosen to shatter the mirror rather than confront what she saw there. So here's what I learned, and here's my advice for anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation. Don't chase closure from people who made a sport out of hiding the truth from you. Don't beg for honesty from someone who has proven themselves to be fluent in lies and manipulation. Don't carry guilt for trusting someone who deliberately buried you in silence while smiling at your face across the breakfast table. You can be the most compassionate, understanding person in any relationship and still end up being the one who gets destroyed. That's not your failure. That's their revelation of who they really are when they think no one is paying attention. So clean out the house, pack up the boxes of broken promises, and scratch their initials off the tree where you once believed in forever. When their phone lights up again with messages designed to make you feel guilty for refusing to disappear quietly, don't answer. You're already living the answer to every question they might ask. I wasn't rebuilding a version of my old life. I was constructing something entirely new, something that belonged completely to me. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, that felt like exactly where I was supposed to be. The house still made different sounds at night, but now they were the sounds of a space that was finally being lived in by someone who appreciated the silence. The coffee tasted better when I made it for one person who actually wanted to be awake and present. The bed was more comfortable when I didn't have to share it with someone who was mentally and emotionally already sleeping somewhere else. Nicole had done me a favor by leaving, even though that had never been her intention. She had freed me from the exhausting work of trying to love someone back to life who had already chosen to become someone else's ghost. And now, I was finally free to discover what my life could look like when I stopped apologizing for taking up space in it. This is what healing actually looks like. Not the dramatic transformation that people expect, but the quiet recognition that you're still standing when the smoke clears, and you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Nicole had freed me from the exhausting daily work of trying to love someone back to life who had already made the conscious choice to become someone else's ghost. Now I was finally able to discover what my actual life could look like when I stopped constantly apologizing for taking up space in my own existence. Harper and I continued to spend time together over the following weeks, but always without pressure or expectations that might complicate what was developing between us naturally. We met for coffee when we both felt like talking, took walks when the weather was nice and we wanted to be outside, and sometimes we simply texted each other articles or observations that we thought the other person might find interesting or amusing. What struck me most about our friendship was how easy it felt to be genuinely present with another person. There was no underlying tension, no sense that I needed to perform or prove myself worthy of attention and kindness. Harper wasn't trying to fix me or change me into someone different, and I wasn't carrying the weight of someone else's emotional baggage while pretending that everything was fine. We were just two people who had each survived the end of relationships that should have ended much sooner than they actually did, and we both understood the profound value of authentic presence without agenda. Neither of us was rushing toward anything or running away from our respective pasts. We were just learning to exist comfortably in the present moment. When I lay in bed now during those quiet hours before sleep, my mind didn't automatically drift toward wondering what Nicole was doing with Derek, or whether she ever experienced moments of regret about the life she had chosen to abandon. I didn't spend mental energy rehearsing imaginary confrontations that would never happen or crafting perfect responses to conversations that existed only in my head. I had stopped checking her social media profiles months ago, and I had no interest in gathering intelligence about her new relationship through mutual acquaintances who might be willing to share updates. Nicole's life had become completely irrelevant to my own healing process, and that detachment felt like the most significant victory I had achieved throughout this entire ordeal. The most profound realization that emerged from my experience was understanding That when someone demonstrates exactly who they are through their consistent actions over time, and you continue to choose hope over evidence because you want to believe they'll eventually change, you're not actually expressing love for them. You're systematically abandoning your responsibility to protect and care for yourself. You're choosing to invest in a comfortable fiction rather than accepting the sometimes painful reality that's clearly visible right in front of you. I had spent the final year of my marriage trying to love Nicole through her gradual transformation into someone who viewed me with contempt, thinking that patience and loyalty would somehow remind her of who she used to be when we first fell in love. But Nicole's capacity for cruelty wasn't a temporary phase or a response to external stress that would eventually resolve itself. It was a fundamental part of who she had chosen to become. And no amount of understanding or accommodation on my part was going to change that essential truth about her character. I could have been the most compassionate, supportive, and emotionally available husband in the history of marriage, and Nicole still would have found reasons to justify her affair and her decision to abandon our relationship without warning. The problem was never that I wasn't good enough for her. The problem was that she had become someone who was incapable of appreciating genuine loyalty and partnership when it was offered freely. When I thought about the advice I would give to someone else facing a similar situation, certain principles became crystal clear. Don't chase closure from people who turned deception into an art form and made a competitive sport out of hiding the truth from you. Don't beg for honesty and transparency from someone who has already proven themselves to be fluent in manipulation and comfortable with elaborate lies that span months or years. Don't carry guilt or responsibility for trusting someone who deliberately created a double life while smiling at you across the breakfast table and making plans for a future they had no intention of sharing with you. Don't blame yourself for failing to detect deception that was specifically designed to be undetectable by someone who loved and trusted the person creating it. You can be the most emotionally generous, patient, and understanding person in any relationship and still end up being the one who gets completely destroyed when that relationship implodes. That outcome isn't evidence of your failure as a partner. It's simply their revelation of who they really are when they think no one is watching or keeping score. So pack up the boxes filled with broken promises, scratch out the carved initials on trees where you once believed in permanence, and return the belongings that represent a life they decided to discard. When their phone lights up with messages designed to make you feel guilty for refusing to disappear quietly into the background of their new narrative, don't respond to the manipulation. You're already living the answer to every question they might ask about your recovery and your ability to move forward without them. I wasn't attempting to rebuild some idealized version of my old life with Nicole, trying to recapture what we used to have during our better days. Instead, I was intentionally constructing something entirely new, something that belonged completely to me, and reflected my actual values and priorities rather than compromises I had made to accommodate someone else's constantly shifting expectations. The transformation wasn't dramatic or sudden. It happened gradually, in small moments of recognition that I was still standing upright when the smoke cleared from the destruction of my marriage, and I was exactly where I was supposed to be for this stage of my life. My house had begun making different sounds during the evening hours, but now they were the sounds of a space that was finally being inhabited by someone who appreciated the silence and solitude rather than viewing it as something to be filled or escaped from. The coffee I made each morning tasted better when I prepared it for one person who actually wanted to be awake and present for the day ahead. The bed was significantly more comfortable when I didn't have to share it with someone who was mentally and emotionally already sleeping in another man's arms, even when she was physically lying next to me. Every aspect of my daily routine became more enjoyable when I stopped having to navigate around someone else's resentment and hidden agenda. Nicole had inadvertently done me an enormous favor by leaving, even though providing me with freedom and peace had never been her intention. She had released me from the soul-crushing work of trying to maintain a connection with someone who had already chosen to become a stranger. And now, I was discovering what authentic contentment felt like when I stopped apologizing for existing and taking up space in my own life. This is what genuine healing actually looks like in practice, not the dramatic transformation or sudden epiphany that people expect from movies, but the quiet, gradual recognition that you survived something that could have destroyed you, and you emerged as a stronger, more self-aware person who knows exactly what he will and won't accept in future relationships. The story wasn't about Nicole's betrayal anymore. It had become about my rediscovery of who I was when I wasn't spending all my energy trying to save someone who didn't want to be saved.